Hello everybody. What we're going to talk about today is the nature of the human ego, what it is, and why it's one of our most powerful things, drivers that keep us from being able to live presently, in the now, and thoughtlessly. So being able to be present with what is, without judgment and without looking into the past and looking into the future. So if you've seen the Why Now video, we're carrying on from there and looking at why it's so difficult, for many people to stay present in the moment. So first of all, we sort of need to look at what we mean by the human ego, or what I mean by the human ego, which is it's the driving force behind what pushes us forward. So remember, with the figure of 8, the future, the when I, it's the driving force and the desire point behind that. And it's the energy that we use to pull in our stories from the past. The interesting thing about the ego is that the ego dies in the now. It doesn't exist in the now. It needs a future to feel better about and a past to be victim to or to remember, in order to survive. And so if we are present and simply being, the ego cannot distract us into the future or the present. I always liken this work. So before you do this work and before you understand living presently, and perhaps do some practice around it, maybe meditation practice or mindfulness practice, that really what we are is we're living in a human disco or rave. So you're in this room with lots and lots of other people and there's just everyone's dancing. I won't dance for you. That's another video. You're all in this room. We're all in this room, this big closed off room, and everyone's dancing. The music's loud, it's crazy. The ego loves it. There's other people to talk to. There's comparison, and there's attraction, and there's drugs and alcohol, anything that numbs us to the now we can take and use it, and the music's distracting us, and we really live like that. But if you were to take a bird's eye view and to pull yourself up above the room and look down, you would notice that really you were just in a shed, and outside the shed is the most tranquil and beautiful forest and lake you've ever seen. But you can't see it because you're in there doing your dancing and doing your numbing drugs and talking to other people. And when we start this work and start looking at living presently, it's sort of like you poke your head out the disco and have a little look, see how peaceful and quiet it is. But quite quickly we shut the door and go back into the mayhem. 1, because it's habit, but 2, because the ego hates it. It's bored, and we find it boring, and we don't really know what it is we're meant to be doing or looking at. We just know that people have told us it's a good thing to do. So we sort of had a look. But practice enough, move yourself out into the forest and go and sit by the lake enough, and you start to hear the birds sing, or you might notice how the wind ripples across the lake. And suddenly, being in this peace and being very present allows all your other senses to begin to wake up. And what is in front of you is at the very least conflict free, and you're able to be present with it. And life begins to unfold for you in that moment. And you can begin to watch your life unfold rather than being in the craziness of the disco, trying to control it all and shout to be heard and hope the future will be somehow different and happier. And so that's what we're looking at, is that who you truly are is not the thoughts and the feelings and the ideas and the judgments and the worries that go on in your mental mind, which we all have, mine too. Who you truly are in the now is the observing presence of it all. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of learning to meditate, because actually if you go far enough with meditation, that's what we're looking at, is being the observing presence of the thoughts and the feelings and the judgments and the memories and the past and the future and the desire. And we can see with enough practice that just isn't who we are. And yet in the disco, that's what we're involved with. We're involved in believing our thoughts and our feelings and who did what and who's doing what and who made me feel like this and who am I making feel like this. And yet come out into the stillness of the forest and the lake, and you have a chance to see that that isn't you. And those thoughts and those feelings and those judgments and those memories are driven by the ego force, as I define it. And the interesting thing about the ego is it drives us on our most fundamental and basic level. So the big secret, if you like, for every single human being, if you can drill down every desire, is that all that any human being ever wants is to feel better, is to feel better than they do now. And we believe, like we saw in the Figure of Eight talk, we think there is a future moment that's better than now, and if we could just get to this place, we would feel better now. Which is crackers, obviously, because you have to put the ingredients in now for the future to contain any of what you perceive will make you feel better. Sometimes we do get what we believe would make us feel better, and we are better sometimes for a while because the desire force stops. But something will come and take its place. It's never enough. And that's because of how the ego works and how it works in humans. So the ego always wants to feel better. And our normal way, we would say, maybe, of feeling better, let's say better's here, would be to achieve something. The weight loss we want, or the win we want, or the lottery win we want. You know, everyone says, oh, I know, apparently winning the lottery doesn't make you feel happy. But secretly we all think, yeah, give me a try. I'll be all right. I know how to handle it. But we hear from other people all the time that these things don't actually make us feel better forever because something else comes in. So the ego and our egos and our driving egos force us to try and achieve these really big things. Let's say winning an Olympic gold. So here we are, you've dedicated a lot of your life winning this Olympic gold. A lot of your childhood maybe, and a lot of social life gone, and you've really fought. You get the gold. That moment is fleeting. 10 minutes at best. Gets done on the rostrum. Maybe you can replay it if you want to, but that actual now moment is really fleeting. And nobody feels better for long. They just can't. And so we have to constantly strive to constantly feel better than we do now. And this is quite a difficult way of feeling better. There's a lot of dedication, there's a lot of hard work, a lot of early nights. You can't spend all the time in the disco. And so that's quite hard for our little egos, our big egos, to achieve all the time. But we still need to feel better. So the really interesting and powerful thing the ego does is, rather than feel better, let's say this is me and that's someone else, the ego seeks to feel better than. So it doesn't actually feel any better at all. But we constantly, like every second of every day, seek to feel better than someone else. And we do it so subconsciously and so blindly that finding the ways you do it will really make you laugh, because we are just nuts in how we do it. In fact, I have a friend, called Raf, and he was an air steward on Qantas, and he told me that business class passengers were much harder to work for when he was being a steward than the first class passengers. I said, all right, okay, well, why? He said, well, first class passengers haven't got anything to prove, whereas the business class passengers have. They know there's another class. They've bought this one, but they know there's another one and there's another one behind them. And that was a wonderful moment, because you can see how the ego is never quite satisfied there. It's better than the economy, but it's not better than the first class. And so our ego really struggles with that, and it seeks then to feel better than something else. And so what easier person to take it out on than the steward? I'm going to need to make sure you know that I'm better than this, or I'm better than you. I can be difficult and you're going to have to put up with me. It's a wonderful example of how the ego works and how crackers it is, and how it leads us to behave in ways that perhaps we would kid ourselves that we don't really behave. You know, who really thinks they're particularly a difficult passenger on a plane? So the ego does this whole dance all the time of constantly seeking to feel better than somebody else. And the ego also seeks to feel right. So do you remember we talked about the past, and the past not really existing when we talked about the now, and how it's a load of stories that we bring into the present? Well, the ego tends to make us, in the past, when it tells a story in the now, it makes us right and it makes us the victim. Because one of the ways the ego feels better than is to be the victim. In fact, one of the favourite places, the most seductive and addictive places for an ego is superior victim. In other words, the victim of the piece and with the worst diagnosis, or taking the most pills, or with the most broken legs, or it is insane in how it is. But if you look around you, and if we're truly honest with ourselves, you can see experientially that that's true. You know, don't believe anything I say on here. Go and live it. Go and see. Go and watch how we seek to be right, to be the victim, to be the superior victim, to feel better. All in ways which we could probably argue don't really help us at all. And so the ego, because the ego dies in the now, because the ego needs the disco, it needs the stimulation, it needs to convince you that you are better than all the time. So if you looked at the video about forgiveness, one of the reasons we struggle so much to make amends, and because remember, amends humbles you. It's not saying sorry about that. It's genuinely owning your part in something and not asking anybody else to own their part in it. And it's one of the best ways of seeing how powerful your ego is, because it's almost painful to do, because the ego hates that someone else might think that you think you're wrong. And yet, one of the most freeing things we can do in our lives is be wrong, be flawed, be fat on Facebook. All those things, the things that frighten the ego so much. They don't kill us. And what they do is they begin to free us from its grip. Once we understand how it works, once we understand that it needs to convince us that there's a future to strive towards where we will feel better, and a past we can pull in to feel better than, to be more of the victim, maybe, or to be right. I mean, you just have to hear people's stories from the past, and they say things like, I think of an example of someone saying, well, my sister said, if she'd known, she would have helped. And I just said, well, that's just a bit too late, isn't it? That's a genuine sentence from someone that I sat opposite. And I just said, but let's just look at that sentence. Your sister just told you she didn't know what was going on. And it took someone just placing it there in front of this person to look and realise that, yeah, her ego had found a story to make her sister wrong and her right, when her sister had just said, I didn't know what was happening, and if I did, I would have helped you. That's it. And we can't bear it. And so what we do and what we begin to do is not just hopefully starting to do some kind of maybe meditative practice. So we start practicing moving ourselves out of the disco and into the serenity of the forest and the lake. We accept that our ego will do anything to pull us away from that, especially going, oh, this is boring. Because quite often it can be, because we're learning. all that, the beauty and the learning to see the wildlife and live within that tranquility actually takes some practice, because the disco is very seductive. So we not only start hopefully some kind of meditative practice, but when we understand it like this, we can catch ourselves. So we actually do the result of the long-term meditation while trying to do meditation. So the result is we understand that we are not our thoughts and feelings. We also understand that when we're present, we're not driven by anything. We're not driven to compare ourselves to others. We're not driven to push other people down, which we do all the time. And we then make kinder and nicer and more peaceful decisions. And like we always say, when we say peace begins in us, peace begins with us, it's actually true. You can't, war is made up of lots of individual people. We can only do this work, come to peace here, and then make our decisions from this place. But at the moment, most people are making decisions in the disco, which is a really tricky place to make peaceful and thought out decisions, because there isn't headspace for it. And so that's really what we're looking at today, is the ego seeks to feel better all the time. It convinces us there's a future where we will feel better than now. It allows us to bring in stories from the past that make us right and or the victim, anything other than lose or be wrong. And it needs to do this with us constantly. If the ego can't feel better and win, it mainly spends its time feeling better than. And none of those behaviours allow us peace here. And until there's peace here, we cannot make decisions in the now moment that bring a more peaceful future, because we have to put the ingredients in now. And so we begin by really being conscious of how we seek to be right. And we begin to consider how we can be humble with others. And we watch the pain the ego goes through when we put ourselves in a lesser position. But I swear, give it a shot and start putting stuff into practice, and life opens up in a whole new way, and you create a life that allows you to be peaceful first and foremost. And the more people that do that, the more likely there will be to have peace on earth.